I'm happy to be here to speak to you from the traditional unceded territories of the Shuswap peoples. My name is Ron Johnston, and I'm the NDP candidate for North Okanagan Shuswap. Excuse me. So my background is coming from Calgary, where I was born and raised. I started a career in mechanical design and drafting and progressed my way through a number of high-tech companies before coming to BC in the year 2000, where I actually lived in Sicamous when I first moved here and was working in Salmon Arm, and eventually moved on to several homes throughout the riding and currently live in Vernon, BC. And I found that people have really had a hard time with COVID and the pandemic, and it's been very hard on their families, and my family's been through a lot of the same struggles with job loss and housing insecurity, and that was a big part of my decision to run. So my goal in running was to bring power and a voice back to working people who are vastly underrepresented in politics. And so we want to give a voice to those people and make the wealthy and big corporations pay their fair share of the recovery going forward into a new future. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll read the questions, the ones that we've previously sent to you, and give you an opportunity to answer them. So question number 1, with so many Canadians receiving CRB and employers struggling to keep staff, how will your party help small business recover from the impacts of the pandemic by getting Canadians back to work?
Well, throughout the pandemic, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP pressured the Liberal government to provide the necessary assistance to both people and small businesses, and we will continue to do so. We were able to get the federal wage subsidy raised from 10% to 75%, which helped keep thousands of workers on the job. Some things that we will do if elected is cap merchant fees for credit card transactions to 1%. And we will also lower telecom, cell phone, and internet rates. Canadians pay some of the highest telecom rates in the world, and we are also committed to expanding infrastructure to bring high-speed internet to rural communities. New Democrats will also implement a hiring bonus that pays the employer portion of EI and CPP and invest in skills training programs, particularly for underemployed groups, that brings them back into the workforce. Our $10 a day childcare program will help bring other people back into the workforce, predominantly women who are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And universal pharmacare will save employers that pay health benefits up to $600 per employee. And the big point too is that we will freeze tax rates for small business and keep wage and rent subsidies in place for those businesses.
Okay, the second question was, the housing market is out of control and rental housing is almost non-existent. This affects the workforce. No housing, no workforce. No workforce, no business. What measures will your party put in place to create a more realistic housing market for first-time home buyers in our riding? And do you have plans to assist with providing affordable rental housing projects for young families and seniors?
So for several decades, our past governments have failed to invest in dedicated rental housing. This has left it up to individual homeowners to fill the gap, leading to shortages and instability as private landlords face their own challenges, frequently needing to remove good tenants after short terms in order to sell. The NDP will reintroduce 30-year mortgages and also tackle the money laundering, which, as we all know in BC, has really inflated the housing market. We will build 500,000 units of quality, affordable housing over 10 years, with over half of that coming online in 5. And we will create incentives like waiving the GST and HST for developers building new, affordable, dedicated rentals. We will increase rent relief to struggling families and introduce a 20% foreign buyers tax. That'll help keep big offshore money from inflating our markets. We also will fast start funding for co-ops and social housing. Thank you.
The last of the pre-saved questions was, the vaccine passport has caused much upheaval in our province. Many All Candidates forums have been cancelled due to the conflict over this program and even threats of violence. Although it is a provincial initiative, is it affecting all BCers? And with more provinces implementing the passport, it will soon be an issue for the entire country. What do you believe needs to happen to ease this conflict?
Well, as each of the provinces has been implementing different versions of a vaccine passport, the federal government needs to be looking at these programs and working with the provinces to bring consistency that will aid in travel between jurisdictions. Currently, we don't know what would happen. For instance, if I take my vaccine passport and I'm traveling in Alberta to visit family and I try to go into a restaurant or pub, is that going to work there? It's just not tested yet. High vaccination rates are the best way to get done with the pandemic sooner though, and that's our main goal. The longer a virus is allowed to carry on in the population, the more likely new variants are to emerge. As far as all of the protests and such, I think education and mutual understanding is the key to diffusing these high tensions, and going forward we need to address the massive growth of misinformation that has been coming predominantly from online sources.
So now we'll move on to the 3 questions that you've just chosen from the basket. So the first question is, we are hearing that people are not planning to vote because they've lost confidence in the government. How do you plan to boost confidence in politics in our riding?
Well, I definitely hear that everywhere I go as I've been traveling around the riding in the last month or a few weeks, and people are definitely disenfranchised with the performance of their past governments. They feel that nobody's listening to them, and it's critical that we rebuild that confidence in government. And throughout the pandemic, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP have pushed the Liberals hard to do the right things for Canadians, and we will continue to do so. And I just lost my train of thought. Can you repeat the last part of the question? Sorry.
This is it. Hang on. This is a tough. We are hearing that people are not planning to vote because they have lost confidence in the government. How do you plan to boost confidence in politics in our riding?
Yeah, so that basically comes from the accountability that's already been shown by the NDP. Like, we are a people's party and we are a workers' party, and we're here to get things done, and that's our goal when elected, is to get to work right away, doing the things that we promised to do, not waiting for a second term or a third term or promising things 8 years down the road. We're gonna get the hard work done right away.
Okay, next one. Canada has opened its borders to the U.S., yet the U.S. is not letting Canadians cross the borders into their country. How is that impacting on our relationship with the U.S., and how would you ensure the borders get open to Canadians wanting to enter the United States?
I think as we look at reopening borders, the disproportionate reopening of one direction of travel seemed to be a little misguided, but the goal is to get people and economies working again, and that includes cross-border commerce and also just international travel and people who have homes or families on both sides of the border. And we need to get our pandemic response under control so that we can let these people access those things again.
Okay. Last question. We must not forget the horrors of the Indigenous population endured in the residential schools. As we are all witness to the pain and suffering inflicted on these people and the hundreds of burial sites identified throughout the country, what does your party plan to do to help the healing process?
So in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released its final report, including 94 calls to action. 6 years later, our government has yet to implement the vast majority of them. Our government is taking Indigenous children and residential school survivors to court in an attempt to overturn the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal decision that ruled in their favor. So an NDP government will implement all 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We will establish a National Council for Reconciliation, and we're committed to ensure there is funding to recognize the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and fully fund the exploration of grave sites at all former residential institutions to bring all lost children home. We will also require churches and governments to hand over any and all records that could help in finding children who lay in unmarked graves, and give Indigenous communities more control over their child welfare systems. In addition to that, we plan to appoint a special prosecutor to pursue those who inflict harm on Indigenous children and to protect Indigenous languages with new legislation and stable funding. We'll also work with the provinces to implement Indigenous history education programs in our schools and fully implement Jordan's principles so that First Nations children are no longer denied the services and supports they need. We'll work across Canada to ensure that clean drinking water and an end to boil water advisories. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That is the end of our questions.